Before you clicked this video, a decision was already made about you. Not your name, not your face, your future, whether you get approved, whether you get flagged, whether you get watched, whether you get stopped. And you never saw it happen because it didn't happen in a courtroom. It didn't happen in a police station. It didn't happen in front of a judge. It happened inside a machine. Right now, as you listen to this, algorithms are scoring you, how risky you are, how trustworthy you are, how valuable you are, based on what you've clicked, what you've searched, what you've bought, who you talk to, and who you resemble. But let's slow down. None of this feels dangerous. Your phone feels safe. Your apps feel friendly. The technology feels helpful. It gives you directions. It recommends music. It helps you find work. It makes life easier. It feels like convenience. It feels like progress. But here's what nobody explains. Those same systems are quietly being used to decide who gets a loan, who gets a job, who gets investigated, and who gets labeled a threat. Not by people, by code. Algorithms, once tools of convenience, have become judges, juries, and sentencers of modern life. And sometimes they get it horribly wrong. People have lost their freedom, their careers, their reputations. Not because of what they did, but because of what a machine predicted. And most of them never even knew a machine was involved. In this story, you're going to hear real cases where software quietly decided someone's fate. No trial, no warning, no way to fight back. Because when a system knows everything about you, it doesn't just watch you. It decides who you are. And by the end of this story, you will understand one hidden truth. The technology that knows you best may be the technology that controls you most. A few minutes ago, you heard something unsettling. That somewhere, something is already deciding who you are. So let's talk about what that something really is. Because it isn't magic. It isn't science fiction. And it isn't a theory. It's a system. A system called predictive technology. In simple terms, predictive systems are used by governments and police to guess what will happen before it does. Who might commit a crime? Where crime might happen? Who might become a threat? Not based on evidence, based on data. Your phone, your purchases, your movements, your friends, your history. Millions of tiny digital traces stitched together to form a prediction about you. Not who you are, but who you might become. This is called predictive policing. It doesn't wait for a crime. It looks for patterns that suggest one. And then it sends officers, surveillance, and suspicion before anything has even happened. You are no longer being watched for what you did. You are being watched for what the system thinks you will do. This idea didn't start yesterday. After the attacks of September 11, 2001, the United States government launched something called Total Information Awareness. The goal was simple and terrifying. To collect as much data as possible, financial records, travel, communications, and use computers to identify people who might become terrorists before they acted. Not after. Before. The program caused public outrage. People realized what it meant, a government that could see everything and decide who was suspicious without proof. So the program was shut down, officially. But the idea never died. It just changed its name. Instead of one giant surveillance program, it became thousands of smaller ones. quiet systems, private contractors, invisible algorithms embedded inside police departments, banks, border control, and courts. No headlines, no debates, no votes, just code. Today, these systems don't just describe the world. They shape it. They decide which neighborhoods get patrolled, which people get stopped, which faces trigger alerts, which names land on watch lists. And once you are inside that system, everything changes. Because when data stops describing life and starts controlling it, police show up more often. You get questioned more. Your name gets flagged. Your risk score rises. Not because you did something, but because the system expected you to. And the more the system watches you, the more it finds. The more it finds, the more it believes it was right. A closed loop. A digital echo chamber where suspicion creates proof. You don't escape it by behaving. You escape it by never being noticed. And almost no one is invisible anymore. In a moment, you're going to hear what happens when real people are pulled into this system. People who were never charged, never convicted, never warned, but were treated like criminals anyway, because a machine said so. And once you understand how that machine works, you'll realize something frightening. You might already be inside it. Up to this point, everything has probably felt distant. Algorithms, data, predictions, cold words, clean screens. So let's talk about a real human being, because this is where technology stops being impressive and starts being personal. In 2014, a man named Eric Loomis stood inside a courtroom in Wisconsin, not in front of a jury, in front of a screen. The judge wasn't asking him questions. The judge was reading a number, a risk score, generated by a piece of software called Compass. Compass was built to do one thing: predict who is likely to commit another crime. It doesn't listen. It doesn't see faces. It doesn't hear tone. It reads data, your age, your address, your history, your associations. Thousands of small details turned into a single verdict: low risk or high risk. Eric was labeled high risk, not because of what he did in that case, but because of what the machine believed people like him might do one day. Eric asked a simple question. How did it decide that? He wanted to see the formula. He wanted to challenge the math. He wanted to defend himself. He couldn't. The company that owned Compass said the algorithm was a trade secret. So Eric was sentenced by a system he was not allowed to examine. Imagine that. Your freedom decided by something invisible. Eric took the case to the Wisconsin Supreme Court. He argued that the system was unfair, that it used race and neighborhood as part of its predictions, that it treated him like a statistic, not a human being. The court acknowledged the risk, and still, they allowed the algorithm to be used, because the system was now part of justice, not because it was right, but because it was efficient. Today, Compass and tools like it are used in courtrooms across the country. They influence bail. They influence parole. They influence how long someone stays behind bars, all based on prediction, not guilt, not innocence. Prediction, and that changes everything. Because once a machine decides you are a risk, society begins to treat you like one. Doors close. Suspicion follows. Your future narrows. You didn't commit the crime yet, but the system already decided how you should be treated. In the next part of this story, you're going to hear about ordinary people who found out, too late, that they had been placed on hidden watch lists. People who were never charged, never warned, never given a chance to defend themselves, all because an algorithm quietly decided they were a risk. And once you hear what happened to them, you'll realize something chilling. Being innocent is no longer enough. At first, it sounded harmless. A map, a few colored boxes on a screen. Police departments were told this new software could show them where crime was most likely to happen, not based on rumors, not on hunches, on data. It was called Predpol, later known as Geolytica. Its promise was simple: put officers in the right place at the right time, and crime would disappear. But here's what the software was really using: old arrest records, past police reports, historical patrol data, not future crime, past police attention. The algorithm didn't ask where crime would happen, it asked where police had already been, and it turned that into a forecast. So the map would light up, small squares of a city glowing red. High-risk area. Police were sent there. They stopped more people. They searched more cars. They made more arrests. Not because there was more crime, but because there were more officers. Those new arrests went back into the system. The algorithm looked at the data and said, "See? Crime is rising here." So it sent even more police, and the cycle repeated. The software wasn't discovering crime. It was manufacturing it. Neighborhoods became trapped. Once an area was labeled dangerous, it stayed dangerous. Not because people were worse, but because they were watched more. You don't find more crime because there is more crime. You find more crime because you are looking harder. People who lived in those red squares didn't know what was happening. They just felt it. More patrol cars, more stops, more questions, more fear. Your street becomes suspicious. Your neighbors become suspects. Your everyday life becomes evidence. Not because you did something, but because a machine expected you to. And once the system expects you to be guilty, it starts collecting proof. This is the hidden truth of predictive policing. Algorithms stopped predicting crime. They started producing it. And the people caught inside those glowing red boxes never stood a chance. At first, it looks like numbers, charts, maps, risk scores, clean, neutral, objective. But numbers don't live in neighborhoods. People do. And when algorithms make decisions, they don't land on screens. They land on streets. The same communities that were ignored for decades suddenly became the most watched. Under-policed turned into over-policed. Not because crime exploded, but because data said it might. And the data came from a past where certain neighborhoods were already treated as suspicious. Those old records became the new blueprint. So when the algorithm learned, it learned bias, not because it hated anyone, but because it was trained on a system that already did. Arrests from the past became predictions for the future, and whole communities were judged by their history. Experts warned what would happen. If you feed a system biased data, it doesn't remove the bias. It automates it. It makes inequality faster, stronger, harder to see. Because now, it isn't a person making the choice. It's a machine. A mother watches her son get stopped again. A father watches police cars circle his block. A teenager learns that where he lives matters more than who he is. And no one can point to a single officer and say, "That's the problem." Because the problem is a screen, a model, a silent system that keeps pointing back at the same people. This is how discrimination evolves. It stops being loud. It becomes technical. It stops using words. It starts using numbers. In the next part of this story, you're going to see how these systems didn't stop with police. They moved into hiring, into credit, into housing, into who gets a chance at a normal life. And once you see how far this goes, you'll understand something terrifying. You don't have to be doing anything wrong to be treated like you are. Up until now, this story has felt distant to some people. Courtrooms, police departments, American cities. So let's step back. Because this isn't just happening in one country. It's happening everywhere. In China, something far larger is unfolding. Not one system, but thousands. Cameras on street corners, facial recognition in train stations, biometric scanners in offices, social media platforms connected to state databases, every movement, every purchase, every interaction, all feeding into massive data networks designed to understand and predict an entire population. The world often talks about a social credit score. The reality is more complicated. There is no single number. There are many systems, many databases, many layers of tracking. But together, they form something powerful, a society where behavior can be measured. Not just what you do, but how you live, who you talk to, where you go, what you say, what you share. In some places, this data determines who gets to travel, who gets a loan, who gets access to good schools, who gets priority in daily life, not because of a crime, because of a score, a quiet calculation of how trustworthy you are, how stable you are, how loyal you are. This is what happens when predictive systems leave police departments and move into society itself. When technology doesn't just watch for danger, it defines it. Imagine a future where disagreeing is a data point, where association is a risk factor, where silence is safer than speech. Not because anyone said so, but because the system noticed. So ask yourself this: what happens when a government can score its citizens not just for crimes, but for loyalty? And what happens when that kind of system no longer stays in one place, but quietly becomes the model for the world? By now, you've seen what these systems can do, how they map cities, how they score lives, how they turn data into decisions. But this is where the real damage happens, not on a screen, in people's lives. There are men and women who have never been convicted of a crime, yet were denied bail, not because of evidence, but because a risk score said they might not come back to court. So they sat in jail, not guilty, not sentenced, just waiting. Some lost their jobs, some lost their apartments, some lost their families, not because they were dangerous, but because a machine predicted they could be. There are people who passed every interview and still never got hired because a background system quietly flagged them. No explanation, no appeal, just silence, and a door that never opened. These systems call them false positives, a technical term, but there is nothing technical about what happens next. Children watch their parents disappear into detention. Spouses struggle to pay bills. Trust collapses, all because of a score. Experts warn that predictive technology does not understand people. It understands patterns. It cannot see context. It cannot see change. It cannot see second chances. So when someone is labeled high risk, that label sticks, even if they've done nothing wrong. And the most dangerous part is that these systems are often treated as more objective than humans, more neutral, more fair. But they are only as fair as the world that trained them, and that world is not equal. So when prediction fails, it doesn't fail quietly. It takes years from people's lives, and once you are caught inside that system, it doesn't matter how careful you are. The future has already been written. There is a moment that happens in almost every case, the moment someone asks, "How did this happen to me? Why was I denied? Why was I flagged? Why was I treated like a risk?" And the answer is always the same: no one knows. Because the systems making these decisions do not explain themselves. They are called black boxes, software so complex and so protected that even the people who use them cannot see how they work. Courts rely on them. Police trust them. Banks use them. Employers listen to them. But no one can open them. The formulas are hidden behind trade secrets, protected as private property. So when an algorithm labels you a threat, you can't challenge the math. You can't cross-examine the code. You can't even see what it used against you. Civil rights lawyers have tried. They go to court and ask for transparency. They ask what data was used, what variables mattered, what assumptions were made, and they are told it's proprietary. The system belongs to a company, not the public, not the people it judges. So a person can lose their freedom, their job, their reputation, and never know why. There are almost no laws that control how these systems are built. No rules about fairness, no standards for accuracy, no requirement to prove they work. They simply appear and become powerful. And once something becomes powerful enough, it no longer needs permission. So the question is no longer whether these systems make mistakes. They do. The question is this: what happens when a machine can decide your future, and no one is allowed to look inside its mind? There is a moment that comes for almost everyone who is caught inside these systems. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's quiet. It's the moment someone finally asks, "How did this happen to me? Why was I denied? Why was I flagged? Why did my name suddenly become suspicious? Why did my life start to close in?" And every time, the answer is the same: no one knows. Because the systems making these decisions do not speak. They do not explain. They do not justify. They do not show their work. They are called black boxes, programs so complex and so protected that even the people who operate them cannot see inside. Courts rely on them. Police trust them. Banks use them. Employers listen to them. But no one can open them. Their formulas are hidden behind contracts, behind intellectual property, behind corporate secrecy. So when an algorithm decides you are a risk, you cannot challenge, you cannot confront the logic. You cannot even see what it used against you. Civil rights lawyers have tried. They stand in court and ask the simplest question: what did the system look at? Was it race? Was it where someone lived? Was it their friends, their history, their past mistakes? And they are told it's proprietary. The algorithm belongs to a company, not the court, not the public, not the person whose life it just changed. So a human being can lose their freedom, their job, their reputation, their future, and never be told why. There are almost no laws that control how these systems are built, no rules about fairness, no standards for accuracy, no requirement to prove they work. They simply appear and quietly become powerful. And once something becomes powerful enough, it no longer needs permission. So the question is no longer whether these systems make mistakes. They do. The real question is this: what happens when a machine can decide your future, and no one is allowed to look inside its mind? By this point, something should feel different. Not the technology. You. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Experts who have spent their lives studying these systems all say the same thing. Predictive technology is not neutral. It does not stand above society. It reflects it, but it doesn't reflect the world as it is. It reflects the world as it was. A world filled with unequal policing, unequal opportunity, unequal suspicion. So when data becomes destiny, those old injustices become permanent. One expert put it simply: these systems are mirrors, but they are warped by flawed data and human prejudice, and people on the other side of those scores feel it every day. A man who was denied work without ever being told why. A woman who watched police circle her home for months even though she had done nothing. A teenager who learned that where he lived mattered more than who he was. They didn't feel like they were being watched. They felt like they were being erased, reduced to a number, a category, a risk. And once you become a risk, the world treats you like one, not because of what you did, but because of what the system expects. This is the warning. Not that technology is evil, but that when we let machines decide who we are, we slowly forget how to see each other at all. There's still time. Time to decide whether technology serves people or people serve technology. Right now, these systems are spreading quietly, not with sirens, not with speeches, with convenience, with efficiency, with promises that everything will be safer, smarter, fairer. But you've seen what really happens when prediction replaces understanding, when data replaces judgment, when a machine decides who you are allowed to be. This story isn't about software. It's about power. Who holds it? Who controls it? Who never has to explain it? And every day we don't question it. It grows stronger. There is still a moment, right now, where the future has not fully hardened, where people can still decide how far this goes. But that moment is closing. Because once a system can predict you, it no longer needs to listen to you. And the day it stops listening is the day you stop being free. If you want to understand how power really works in the 21st century, subscribe. Because the most important stories are the ones no system wants you to hear.